Right now on the National Weather Desk, deadly storms. Severe weather batters Texas, blowing out windows in high-rise buildings, knocking out power to 1 million customers.
Dust blowing down from the ceiling tiles.
We'll show you the damage and where the storm is heading next. We'll also explain the difference between a tornado and a downburst.
With straight line winds or a downburst, everything falls in one direction.
And it's Preakness weekend. We'll look at the history of weather at the Triple Crown event and see the impact rain can have on the odds makers.
Do you consult with meteorologists at all?
From our nation's capital, this is the National Weather Desk.
And good morning, everyone, and welcome to the National Weather Desk. I'm Angela Brown. Fast-moving thunderstorms roared through Houston, Texas last night. The powerful winds killed at least 4 people, blowing out windows of high-rise buildings and also knocking out power to nearly 1 million homes and also businesses. Streets all across South Texas flooded, and countless trees and power lines were in what the mayor says were 100-mile-per-hour winds came down. As a result, schools are closed in Houston today. And now this was the scene in southern Louisiana yesterday. Damaging winds nearly 70 miles per hour pushed through the area. You can see here the pine trees were bending over because of the wind. Storm chaser Brett Adair captured this drone video. As the storms moved in, the rain was so heavy at times it led to near zero visibility for drivers along the I-10 corridor, of course, impacting traffic as well. The most noteworthy damage is in downtown Houston. You see it here. Look carefully at this video, and you can see storm debris swirling outside the Wells Fargo Plaza. Those winds also blew out hundreds of windows in high-rise buildings, including hotels and also offices. People on the higher levels say they could feel the building swing. This flash you see is at a power station right here. The power lines and towers were no match for these powerful winds. More than 800,000 Texas power customers are still without power this morning. And 2 of the deaths in Texas were the result of trees falling on cars. You can see just how big these trees are that flatten the cars below. Amy Kiley has more on the storms.
Oh my God.
Today, life-threatening floods are clobbering southern states for the second day in a row. The Weather Prediction Center says a rare level of rain is behind these scenes from Texas yesterday. Today, that state, Louisiana, and Mississippi are drenched as the system also stretches to states farther east. And flash flooding isn't the only danger from these rounds of storms.
Evidently a guy had something fall into his car outside, and he came running in, had a gash on his arm about 8 inches, and we had to put a tourniquet on it.
Officials say multiple people are dead from severe weather in Houston. This building there is partially collapsed, and some skyscrapers have shattered windows.
We're in the restroom and we hear everybody screaming and coming toward the restroom, and there's like dust blowing down from the ceiling tiles.
Here's another view of the storms from 22,000 miles above the earth. Look at this. You can easily see the power of the storms and all the lightning rolling through Texas towards Houston. The damage in Houston was not the result of a tornado. Instead, straight line winds and also downbursts can often cause significant damage as well. Meteorologist Evan Chikmara explains.
Let's talk about how you can tell the difference between tornadic damage and wind gust damage. A question I got the other day, and it's a fair question because a lot of people, when they see wind damage, they jump to the conclusion that, hey, it came from a tornado. And a lot of times it does. Let's talk about what sort of damage a tornado leaves behind first. So with a tornado formation, one of the things we know is the winds are very chaotic. You get a tornado development you get this inflow into the thunderstorm, the rotation within the supercell, and then the following funnel that reaches from the cloud base to the surface. Now, with this very violent funnel, you get winds in all different directions. So the damage path is going to be one that features winds that have ripped things out of the ground in one direction, the other. That little pot on your front porch, gone. Things are just left in utter ruin. With straight line winds or a wind gust or a downburst, it's a little bit different. So our setup is the same. You still have winds going up into a thunderstorm. These grow vertically pretty tall, but they don't have that setup where you get that wind shear and subsequent tornado. Instead, these build and build and build. You have heavy rain, you have hail, all within this thunderstorm, and eventually it's too heavy. It cannot stay within the updraft any longer, and it comes out. Well, notice with these trees, what happens? Wind fans out in the direction, and it basically flattens everything. So when you look at an overhead view of these with a downburst or straight line wind damage, you're going to have everything falling over like dominoes. Whereas with a tornado, you will see violent winds in all different directions. You'll have a tree falling this way across the street. You will have a fence fall in the other direction because you have that change in winds. With straight line winds or a downburst, everything falls in one direction. Both can be very dangerous, but that's the difference.
Well, this has been a very busy storm season with considerable damage from Ohio to Texas and Alabama. Much of the video we show you comes from our storm chaser, Brett Adair. Jade Moreau spoke with Brett to talk about things like being so close to severe and also dangerous weather.
An interest in weather and the way it works turned into a career and hobby for meteorologist Brett Adair.
May the 29th, 2004, watched the supercell produce 20-plus tornadoes in southern Kansas, and it was like, man, this is what you're going to do. I was hooked at that point.
When the weather started brewing in the south, Adair found himself in Louisiana, where several confirmed tornadoes caused significant damage in Sulphur, Lake Charles, and Westlake. Adair is a drone pilot. Video showing a clear path of destruction.
We were dealing with trees swaying, whiteout conditions on Interstate 10. We knew that this was going to be a bad storm system, and unfortunately, we even had a fatality further east.
Lake Charles was hit by a tornado just weeks ago. While people in that area and here in southeast Texas are used to hurricanes, it might seem that tornadoes are in the forecast more often. Adair says there's been an upwards trend over the last few years that even suggests this theory.
We're in a catch-22 situation here where we've either got a tornado threat that runs 6 months out of the year, or we've got a hurricane threat that runs 6 months out of the year.
Adair says people can't let their guard down as we are just weeks away from the start of hurricane season.
Everybody just needs to have that emergency plan ready to go for either situation because it's going to be a busy several months.
Well, this is shaping up to be another hot and humid day and weekend in South Florida. The heat index will soar into the triple digits. That follows 2 straight days of record-setting heat. Storms could move into the region by the end of the weekend. Well, tomorrow is the 149th running of the Preakness Stakes. Kentucky Derby winner Mystic Dan is right now the favorite, but the weather could play a big role in the outcome. We'll look at the history of weather at Pimlico in a moment, but first, the forecast from Baltimore meteorologist Gerard Bailey.
We are tracking rain as we move in through this weekend. Your Friday is going to be dry. Saturday looks like we are going to be tracking some heavier downpours coming for the Preakness Stakes. So this is not ideal weather for horses, and it just depends on which horse you're betting on. Of course, some like the rain track. If you have the betting right, you'll end up with some good rewards. But here's a look at your Preakness weekend. So today, 76 degrees for Black Eyed Susan's race, and we'll have that. It'll just some cloudy skies, perhaps a few breaks into the sunshine, but otherwise dry. And then Saturday, we are looking at rainfall likely here, 70 degrees, but again, it's going to be a pretty messy track, lots of mud. Make sure you've got some really good shoes to protect you.
For the 149th time, the final run is set to happen before the big reconstruction here at Pimlico in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm meteorologist Amy Aronson in my big hat with a look back at some of the big weather extremes from over the years. Since 1873, it's actually rained 84 times. That's 57% of the time it rains for Preakness. The wettest dates back to May 22nd, 1885, with 1.3 inches of rain. The hottest was May 19th, 1962, with a toasty 98 degrees. The coolest high, May 17th, 2003, at 52 degrees. And the coldest low, May 10th, 1947, at 39 degrees. In Baltimore, Maryland, I'm meteorologist Amy Aronson.
And to stay up to date with all the latest weather news, be sure to follow us on social media. We post the latest from our team of meteorologists across the country. You can find us on all of your favorite platforms. Just search the National Weather Desk or scan the QR code on the bottom left corner of your screen. And coming up on the National Weather Desk, we'll hear from an odds maker about how weather can impact the odds of horse racing. And we'll help you better understand the heat index.
I'm meteorologist Charlie Lopresti with Look at the Northeast. We're headed for a pretty good-looking day in the Northeast with a wide range in temperatures. Most of New England stays in the 50s and 60s, while New York, New Jersey, you'll warm into the 70s. You get away from an ocean influence, we're quite a bit warmer. Now expect more clouds than sun on Saturday. There may be a spot shower here and there. We're brightest once again in New York. There we will be warmest as well. Skies will become brighter area-wide in the Northeast on your Sunday, with temperatures warming back into the 60s and 70s.
I'm Chief Meteorologist Gerard Bailey. Here's a look at the Mid-Atlantic region. Moving through your Friday, we'll start out with partly to mostly cloudy skies, but otherwise dry until we get to the evening hours, where we'll see our next shot at rainfall and other weather makers coming in to bring us good chances for rainfall overnight into your Saturday morning, and that'll likely be sticking around, at least a chance for that through Sunday. It looks like Friday is still going to be fairly warm, mid to upper 70s possible. We should be a little bit cooler on Saturday afternoon.
I'm meteorologist Vetus Reed. Here's a look at your southeast forecast highs for the day. Looking at 70s from Nashville through Atlanta. Birmingham about 75 degrees, Tupelo 78. 82 in Raleigh, stretching down the I-95 corridor through Charleston, getting hotter as you get towards Jacksonville and parts of Florida. We do have some cloud cover and a storm system that's moving through parts of the Tennessee Valley and also parts of the South as we go through the day. Expect rain continue to lift up into parts of Atlanta and into Raleigh, and some heavier storms across the Gulf states.
You are watching the National Weather Desk.
The second leg of the Triple Crown is tomorrow. Horse racing fans will descend upon Pimlico and Baltimore to see the Preakness Stakes. But the chance of showers in the forecast could impact the outcome of that race. Meteorologist Emily Gracie spoke to an odds maker to get an inside scoop.
And the Kentucky Derby winner, Mystic Dan, who's now going to be the favorite in the Preakness as he tries to go for a Triple Crown or keep that dream alive. He's got a really big race earlier this year in Arkansas over a wet racetrack. So the connections of Mystic Dan and certainly the betting public, they will not be disappointed if it rains because, theoretically it's going to move their horse up because he's already handled an off track before, whereas some of the other horses entered have not really had to deal with that before. And each track is different, certainly. And none of these horses have run at Pimlico before, but it's just kind of another feather in your cap if you've shown you can handle it. And not only that, his best race, I know he was awesome in the Derby, but his best race really was over a muddy off track.
Okay, so he's a mudder.
Yeah.
What defines that, and why does that exist?
I don't really know if anything defines it, Emily. Some people think breeding helps and that kind of thing, and it certainly could. But at the end of the day, you've got to run over it and show you can handle it because some horses just love it and some horses just hate it. Maybe it's got something to do with their hooves and how they drive into the racetrack. But some horses have shown an affinity for it. Others have just not liked wet off racetracks at all.
Tell me about how you come up with the odds and how weather factors into that. Do you consult with meteorologists at all?
No, I can't. It's just too far out. And as you know, as this is your profession, it can just change. The only goal of the morning line is to predict what the actual betting public, and when I say that, that's everybody that's betting on this race, who they're going to make the favorite and what the odds are of all the horses and they're going to be.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes more sense. But, if it does happen to rain, the odds are going to be in Mystic Dan's favor, right?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. 100%.
And if you want to take a deeper dive into horse racing and also weather, check out the longer version of this interview on YouTube. Just search the National Weather Desk. Well, salmon populations in California are low due to years of extreme drought, wildfires, and other environmental factors. And as Rudy Aguedo reports, officials in the state are looking for ways to help increase that population.
The Pacific Fishery Management Council has approved 3 options for ocean salmon season.
The level of fish that the council that measures all the fish that are out in the ocean and in the river system, those numbers didn't add up to the level that's needed to have a healthy, sustainable fishery.
2 of those alternatives would authorize short season dates and establish small harvest limits for commercial and sport fishing off California, while the third would close ocean fisheries off California for a second consecutive year.
By having these closures, we're hoping in the next few years that the fisheries, if not next year, maybe the year after that, that these fisheries will be back in healthy, sustainable levels that we can open the fishery and people can start making a living again.
Key California salmon target stocks are forecasted to have levels below average, with Sacramento River fall chinook and Klamath River fall chinook being the most abundant.
We want to get back to that level like everybody else of maintaining, sustaining a healthy fishery for people to enjoy for future generations.
The warmer than usual weather in Iowa gave some farmers a head start on planting season. However, recent rain in the area has put planting on hold. Meteorologist Garrett Hyde has more.
When we first spoke with Tom Carmen, he was excited to be able to get a slight head start to the planting season, with corn and soybean planting across the state ahead of the 5-year average for most of April. However, this spring season has been one of the wettest we've seen in a few years, and while the excess rain is certainly helpful, it is keeping some farmers from getting into their fields, slowing some of the crop planting progress. In the first crop progress update for the month of May, we saw Iowa farmers starting to fall a little bit behind schedule, and that delay is carrying through this week's update as well, with fewer days suitable for fieldwork across the state, falling from about 4 to 5 days of the week down to just a day or 2 since the beginning of May.
A couple weeks behind doesn't make too much of a difference. I know, like, if you're still planting corn, they say by May 20th you might want to start thinking about different varieties. We're still 10 days away probably from that before we have to make those decisions. I know a lot of guys are kind of finishing up. Ideal conditions are kind of out the window here anymore, so we just gotta make the choice to get out there and just get it done. So, like I say, you gotta look at the calendar and do what's right for you in your situation.
Beyond that, Tom says he's optimistic about the season, but is hoping the rains can continue through the majority of the growing season. Although we've seen in recent years how early rainfall in the spring and dry summer conditions can lead plant roots to develop a much shallower profile, making it much more difficult for crops to thrive. For now, the Climate Prediction Center indicates it will have equal chances for seeing near normal amount of precipitation over the next 3 months. But of course, only time will tell how the season will pan out.
For at-home gardeners, knowing when the last freeze happens is very important. Meteorologist Jeff Exline looks at what part of the country could still see freezing temperatures.
For much of the country, the average date of the last freeze is now behind us. Only those areas in the darker shadings of green have their average date of last freeze in the latter part of May or early June.
So for much of the country, plant away. But wait a second, you may have heard Grandma say, don't plant anything outdoors until the Iceman days have passed. What are the Iceman days? Well, the tradition comes from Northern Europe, and it's tied to the successive feasts of St. Memeritus, St. Pancras, and St. Servatius, whose respective feast days are on May the 11th, 12th, and 13th. These are referred to as the 3 chilly saints. Remembering that the last frost of the year generally falls around these feast days was a useful marker for pre-modern farming.
And as things continue to get warmer, you'll probably hear your local meteorologist talk a lot about the heat index. But what does it mean? Florida meteorologist Charlotte Carl explains how it works.
We are unfortunately at that time of year where we are not only talking about heat, but we are talking about heat index values, which is when you factor the dew point into our ambient air temperature. So let's take tomorrow, for example. In West Palm, our forecasted high is in the low 90s, 92 degrees. When we factor in that afternoon dew point of 75, that gives us a heat index value of 103. Now up along the Treasure Coast, 93 degrees, so just a degree warmer, but we have a few degrees lower of a dew point. So that makes the heat index value value 103. So what the heat index is, it's that actual ambient air temperature combined with the humidity in the atmosphere. It's also known as the apparent temperature. We sometimes call it the feels like temperature. And when we get a high temperature and a high dew point, what happens is our body can't evaporate the sweat that comes out of our sweat glands. So that is our main mechanism for cooling ourselves down. So that inhibits you from being able to cool down, and it causes your internal body temperature to rise. And there is a direct relationship between the air temperature and humidity increases and also heat index values increasing.
And time now for a short break, but first let's take flight over California's Sequoia National Forest.
Good Friday morning, everyone. I'm meteorologist Andrew Buck-Michael, taking a look here at what your next weather makers across the Midwest for the coming days for today and heading into the weekend. Got a few thunderstorms to the far north across the plains and more thunderstorms across the Ohio Valley. Both of these systems going to slowly be shifting their way to the east as we head into your Saturday. Look at that, 90 in Wichita for your Saturday. Continuing on into Sunday, got some thunderstorms bubbling up again across the Dakotas and the northern plains here. So could be dealing with a little bit of thunderstorm activity Sunday.
Well, good Friday morning to you, meteorologist Chris Suchan. Look at our forecast today across the region, and we will keep an eye out along the Gulf Coast, Texas, Louisiana, for the risk of a strong to severe thunderstorm through the day with wind and some hail. Also a chance to see a thunderstorm or two up and around Little Rock into the afternoon, evening. Highs will be in the 70s and the 80s across the region. And as we step into that weekend forecast, really drying things out, maybe leftover rain chance in eastern Louisiana. Otherwise, 80s, 90s, and also humid to get the weekend started.
Well, hi there, everybody, and good Friday morning, too. I'm meteorologist Shannon O'Donnell. End of the work and school week, and here comes the heat again as we head into the weekend, especially from Death Valley and Southern California back into southern Arizona. Triple digits there this afternoon. Low 50s, meanwhile, on the cooler end with scattered showers pushing through Missoula, and that's really the weather maker out west. We've got those scattered showers that will keep things cool and damp over the Continental Divide. And that's the scene from here.
You are watching the National Weather Desk.
Ham radio or amateur radio operators probably seem like a thing of the past, but there are still plenty of amateur radio enthusiasts all over the country, and they're helping to keep you safe during severe weather. Meteorologist Donnie Cox has more.
It is severe weather season, hurricane season not that far away, and of course, one thing you need to make sure is that you know what's going on in your area. One of the ways to do that, you see Bob here from the Amateur Radio Club. He helps us out with our Weather Radio Wednesdays to keep you alert to severe weather. And Bob, one thing is you guys are a big asset to the area, to emergency management, and to the Weather Service.
We certainly are, and we work with different emergency management systems to provide emergency communications during severe weather, other emergency communications on there, and we work it through what's called the Amateur Radio Emergency Services.
And it's always a way that you know that you're seeing what is going on the ground, because the amateur radio clubs have people all over the country.
And we'd love to share your weather content on the air. You can find us on all your favorite social media platforms. Just search the National Weather Desk. We'll be right back. And thank you so much for joining us. I'm Angela Brown. Make it a great Friday. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday.